In the quietness of night, when lights turned off, I'd often doze to the rhythmic swirling of metal grinding against cement. It's hypnotic, like waves rolling into shore. I'd envision its creator dripping in sweat, diligently turning a flat rectangular piece of metal into a razor-sharp bone splitter. A lifesaver and a life taker. Although the sound was amplified in the silence of night, due to all the metal, concrete, acoustics in the unit, it was difficult to pinpoint its source. It could be next door or 9 cells away on either floor. The sound vibrated, not loudly, but audible, like a low hum. I'd catch COs, correctional officers, sneaking past my cell in their socks, trying to creep up on someone to catch red-handed. They rarely succeeded, for reasons not disclosed, along with where the metal came from. It's rather terrifying when you suspect that familiar hum you hear has your name on it. I've spent many sleepless nights racing like a lion in a cage, waiting for the door to slide open, ready to face my destiny. Think of how frightening it is to go to sleep nightly, knowing death awaits you. Tommy Silverstein. I'm killing your ass, Silverstein. It was the morning of May 11th, 1982, and Silverstein had been looking at a nude photo of a former girlfriend when he'd realized someone was threatening him outside his cell bars in the control unit. He looked up but didn't recognize the black inmate speaking to him. You hear me, Cracker? I'm killing your punk ass, Raymond Cadillac Lee Smith continued. A correctional officer in the lockbox landing shouted down seat range. Lock up, Smith. I don't even know you. I don't want any trouble, Silverstein replied. You killed 2 of my homies, you punk ass cracker. Silverstein was confused. You killed Steamboat and Chappelle. Now I'm killing you. Get in your hole, Smith, the officer again yelled, or I'll write you up. Smith trudged down the range to his cell. Word quickly spread through the control unit about Raymond Lee Smith, who bragged that he only drove Cadillacs when a free man in his native Washington, D.C. The 39-year-old had a fierce reputation and criminal past that dated to his teens. In the 1960s, he seized control of the district's narcotics and numbers racket. In 1972 alone, he was accused of murdering a rival drug dealer, critically wounded a potential witness, kidnapping a numbers operator, extorting money, and killing a gambler in front of multiple witnesses in a D.C. carry-out restaurant. He was so feared in black neighborhoods that witnesses who had watched him cold-bloodedly murder the gambler had been afraid to testify, and prosecutors had been forced to drop the murder charge. A few weeks after that, Cadillac Smith had killed another man. The police who went to arrest him were armed with machine guns and fully expected a shootout, but he'd surrendered peaceably. While in the D.C. jail awaiting trial, Cadillac and 7 other prisoners had busted out a skylight, climbed out onto the roof, and shimmied down a fire hose. It was the biggest breakout in the jail's history. Cadillac was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to 23 years, and sent to the federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, PA. He wasn't there long. He was stabbed by an inmate who he'd reportedly raped years earlier when in D.C.'s Lorton prison. According to BOP records, Cadillac was a prison rapist who often sexually assaulted his victims after he knocked them unconscious. He bragged that his punches were so powerful that few could remain standing after a single blow. From Lewisburg, he'd been moved to Marion's general prisoner population, but that didn't last. He fought with 2 inmates who later claimed that Cadillac had also tried to rape them. As punishment, Cadillac Smith was put into the control unit. Cadillac liked to show off his knife wound from Lewisburg. He called it a mosquito bite. Eddie Griffin, a bank robber turned Black Panther activist and prison writer, said later. Griffin was Cadillac's exercise partner in the control unit. Cadillac told me the knife folded like tinfoil, hitting a brick wall when he was stabbed. He was built like a buffalo, with thick leather hide, and was buff because he pumped iron all day. Cadillac Smith was a bully, Griffin added. He would run over you if you let him, to test your heart, but if you stood up to him, he'd respect you. Didn't mean he would back off, but he'd respect you. Silverstein was being held in cell 2 on C Range, the closest cell to the lockbox landing, where correctional officers were stationed. His cell was close enough they would have overheard Cadillac Smith's threats. Even if they hadn't, Cadillac Smith was quick to repeat them. He wouldn't shut up, Silverstein complained. For the next 6 hours, he hollered down the range about how he was going to avenge his homies. I wasn't even in Marion when Steamboat was murdered. He was killed by Clay and Colum, but I decided trying to reason with this fool was hopeless. I'd already made a mistake when I told him I didn't want any trouble. Cadillac saw that as weakness. Clay Fontaine was in the cell next to Silverstein, and he passed his mentor a kite, asking if he thought Cadillac was selling wolf tickets. making empty threats. They asked Norman Little Matt Matthews, who lived in a cell near Cadillac, to spy on him. Many blacks in the control unit spoke a black version of Pig Latin that was difficult for whites to understand. Silverstein said, but Little Matt had learned it and passed word to us about what was being said. Matthews said black prisoners were trying to persuade Cadillac to stop making threats because they didn't want a race war. Cadillac was unmoved. He was the self-declared leader of the DC Blacks prison gang, and he was furious other gang members had not sought revenge earlier, especially since Steamboat Stewart was his cousin. Like a farm rooster at dawn, Silverstein said, we'd wake to, you rat fucking crackers, get your coward asses up. Calling us crackers and cowards insulted other whites, and it was inevitable. That cracker slur was soon being answered by Nig. No one I knew dared sleep during the day until 9 at night, when everyone was locked in. Only then could you kick your shoes off and relax until breakfast. Cadillac asked for permission to exercise with Silverstein, and he made certain everyone on the range heard his request. Not wanting to be labeled a coward, Silverstein signed the required consent release, agreeing and quietly secured his shank. Officers refused to let them out of their cells together. Cadillac's taunts escalated. Clay Fontaine took the worst of the verbal abuse. He was the C-Range orderly, a job that alternated between blacks and whites each month. Gang members coveted the job because orderlies could move freely on the range, which gave them access to shanks for delivering since no one wanted to keep a weapon in their cell. Fontaine's duties included sweeping and mopping outside the cells each night when everyone else was locked up. He also fetched hot water from a sink in cell 1, where the showers were located for prisoners. It was the only hot water available on the range. Inmates used it to make soup, tea, or coffee. The water in each prisoner's cell was kept cold to prevent inmates from throwing scalding water at officers and at each other. One night, Fontaine found something splash on his face as he was mopping near Cadillac Smith's cell. The threatening inmate has doused Fontaine with a cup filled with urine and feces. Because Silverstein was living at the front of the range in cell 2, there was no reason for him to walk in front of Cadillac's cell and face a similar baptism, but that changed when he was moved without explanation to the rear of C-Range. Now, whenever he left his cell to take a shower or exercise, Cadillac Smith was waiting for him. Bang! Silverstein heard a noise and smelled sulfur as he moved by Cadillac's cell going to the shower. Cadillac had fired a zip gun that he made out of rolled up paper and ground up match heads at Silverstein, but the gun had caught fire and singed Cadillac's hand. On September 6th, a black prisoner who'd been friendly with Silverstein stopped outside Silverstein's cell after exercising with Cadillac Smith. I can help you with Cadillac, he volunteered. Silverstein rose from his bunk and walked to the front of his cell to hear him. The moment he reached the bars, a knife swung at his face. He jerked his head back just in time. Cadillac Smith had been hiding out of sight with his back against the wall at the edge of Silverstein's cell. Next time, cracker, Smith boomed. An officer on duty in the lockbox heard the commotion, ordered Cadillac and his buddy to go to their cells, and then entered the range to investigate. Silverstein said he and Cadillac had been having a lively discussion about football. There was no mention of the attempted stabbing. Cadillac also played it off, but someone on the range told officers what had happened, and Cadillac was put into a boxcar cell as punishment for 30 days. Clay and I decided it was only a matter of time before he got us or we got him. The problem was how to get to him. Clay could have thrown hot water on him while working as an orderly, but we needed him dead, not burned. After Chappelle had been strangled, prison officials had constructed a wire enclosure in the exercise area between the cell fronts and exterior wall. This interior recreation cage was designed to keep prisoners from being able to roam the range. They were only out of their cells when they went for showers or going to and from the exercise cage. Clay and I secured 2 prison shanks, approximately 12 inches long and an inch wide. Razor sharp on both sides, Silverstein said. We also got a piece of a hacksaw blade. Whenever Silverstein and Fontaine were in the exercise cage together, they used the piece of hacksaw to cut the cage's heavy mesh strands. They were cutting a hole big enough for them to crawl through. One would kneel down using the blade while the other shielded him by doing exercises to block the correctional officer's view from the lockbox landing. They had cut for about a week when Cadillac finished his time in a boxcar cell and returned to C-Range. He immediately taunted Silverstein and Fontaine. I began wanting to kill him 1,000 times over every day. Hate consumed me, Silverstein recalled. They still needed several more days to cut through the wire barrier. Each day they cut through a wire and used putty from bread that they colored black with ink to disguise their handiwork. Finally, they broke through the last wire. Silverstein passed a hacksaw blade that was less than an inch long to other gang members for safekeeping. There was nothing left to do now except wait for an opportunity to kill Cadillac. An officer doing a routine check discovered the shank hidden in the exercise cage that Silverstein had planned to use to kill Cadillac. The officer had no idea who had put it there. The next night, another officer entered the exercise cage with a rubber mallet and began tapping on its fencing to test for cut wires. Silverstein and Fontaine watched the officer approach the wires they cut loose. He swung his mallet about an inch above their cuts, but nothing broke free, and he continued his check completely unaware of what he'd missed. Clearly, time was running out. Silverstein used his handheld mirror poked through his cell bars to watch Cadillac each night when he heard officers ask if the inmate wanted to take a shower. Cadillac always carried a rolled-up towel with him. Silverstein assumed a shank was hidden inside it. Silverstein said later that he and Fontaine would pump themselves up in the exercise cage, hoping Cadillac would be freed from his cell to walk down the range for a shower. That's when they could strike. Each night they would be disappointed because Cadillac was never released from his cell at the same time the two of them were in the exercise cage. On September 27, 1982, a Monday, that changed. Just before 8 p.m., an officer called down the range and asked if Cadillac wanted to take a shower. Yes, he hollered back. Inside the exercise cage, Silverstein and Fontaine shook hands. Let's do this, Silverstein said, as they watched Cadillac leave his cell, carrying a rolled-up towel. Clay and I yanked on the wire mesh to break it free, so we could crawl through onto the range, but it didn't budge. We hadn't cut completely through a couple critical links, which explained why the guard's rubber mallet hadn't shaken it loose. We no longer had the hacksaw blade, and we began frantically jerking on the wire mesh, fearful we'd miss our chance. I began to panic, but it finally popped loose. Silverstein had not been able to obtain another shank, so they decided Fontaine would be the first to crawl through the hole onto the range with his shank. Silverstein would follow. An officer stationed at the lockbox landing happened to glance down the range, just as Fontaine was climbing free from the exercise cage. "Fontaine, what are you doing?" he called out. The officer spotted Silverstein. "Oh my God!" He hit deuces on his portable radio, calling for backup. Cadillac Smith heard footsteps behind him and spun around. He drew an ice pick-shaped shank from inside his rolled-up towel. It had been made from a piece of a towel rack. Fontaine lunged at him with his shank, but Cadillac ducked the blow and stabbed Fontaine in his chest, causing him to stumble backward. Silverstein flew by Fontaine and tackled Cadillac, knocking him off his feet. The black man's head smacked hard against the concrete, stunning him. I grabbed the shank he was holding with my bare right hand as he struggled to stand, Silverstein said. He tried to rip it from my fingers, but I held on and managed to pull the blade away from him. I slammed it into his chest before pulling it out, and then jabbing it again, and again, and again, as quickly as I could. He tried to block each thrust with his right arm while trying to punch me in the face with his left fist. One of his blows hit my jaw, causing me to back up and gulp for air before I lunged back at him. I heard him scream, "What did I do?" And I thought, you fucking serious? Suddenly, he's the victim? Blood was spattered everywhere. Unlike in the movies where a person is stabbed once and dies, murder is ugly and violent, and your inherent will to survive kicks in, Silverstein said. As I was stabbing him, all I could hear was deafening chants. "Kill that motherfucker!" Then the guards' voices. "Stop! Stop!" But I'd witnessed enough stabbing to know no guards were going to unlock the lockbox grill and leave the safety of the landing until one of us was dead. My only focus was on killing him. All that mattered was that he die. I kept stabbing him with his own shank, and Cadillac kept trying to block my attack. He managed to stand up, but was struggling to keep standing. Knowing that falling would make him even more vulnerable, finally I put enough holes into him that he collapsed on all fours. I quickly drove the shank into his heart. The gooners were banging their nightsticks on the lockbox bars. Drop the knife and step into the shower. But in that moment, the world vanished, leaving just Cadillac and me. Out of sheer meanness and madness, I shoved Cadillac over onto his chest, dropped to my knees, drew back the shank, and struck him with such force that I felt its tip pass through his body and strike the cement floor beneath him. Fontaine joined him and began stabbing Smith. Clay was hysteric, Silverstein said, shouting incoherently as he stabbed his blade into Cadillac's chest and face. All the rage and anger spewed out of us. I never saw so much blood. We were slipping in it like the floor was covered with oil. Silverstein grabbed Cadillac's lifeless left arm and told Fontaine to grab his right. He wanted to drag the corpse down to the cell where one of Cadillac's gang buddies was housed. Cadillac was too heavy and slippery with blood. "Cop a squat," Silverstein recalled telling Fontaine. I walked down the range to confront the punk who had lured me to the front of my cell for Cadillac to stab. I saw his mirror sticking out of his bars as I neared. He watched us stabbing Cadillac, and he knew I was coming for him, but his cell was locked, and he was hiding in the back of it. "You're next," Silverstein shouted at him. Silverstein dragged his shank across the cell's front bars and slung the shank's tip at the inmate, sending droplets of Cadillac's blood from the knife at the cowering inmate's face. He screamed like the little bitch he was, yelling to me. "That was Cadillac, not me, Tommy. We're cool," I replied. "I thought so too until you tried to kill me, you fucker. I wanted to drag Cadillac's body back to this coward's cell and cut his head off, but the officers and other backup guards had gotten into riot gear inside the lockbox and were preparing to come onto the range. By now, there were too many of them." A BOP Board of Inquiry investigation of the murder later noted that Silverstein was seen shaking hands with inmates as he walked along the range laughing and joking. He stopped and handed his knife to someone. When he rejoined Fontaine, Silverstein said, "I bet that punk shit his panties when he saw us coming for him." "Yeah, that cocksucker wasn't so tough after all," Fontaine replied. "Tom, you ready to give it up?" "Yes," he replied. Fontaine called to the officers. "It's over. Just wait a minute." According to the Board of Inquiry report, Fontaine removed the lanyard from around his wrist and handed his weapon through the bars to officers. They opened the lockbox grill and told Fontaine to come forward so he could be removed from the range and taken to the infirmary for his chest wound. Inmate Silverstein came to the front of the range where he kicked Cadillac Smith in the head before locking himself in the shower. Cadillac Smith's body was removed on a stretcher. An autopsy would determine that he'd been stabbed 67 times. Fontaine was treated for a non-life-threatening puncture wound. He and Silverstein were placed in control unit boxcars, cells as punishment, and charged with premeditated murder. Prosecutors also charged Barry the Baron Mills with aiding and abetting the killing. He had been transferred from Atlanta to the control unit, and an ice pick-shaped shank, believed to be the weapon that Silverstein had used to kill Cadillac Smith, had been found inside a shoe in Mills' cell along with a piece of hacksaw blade, hidden in a toilet. Silverstein and Fontaine agreed to plead guilty in return for prosecutors dropping all charges against Mills. When they were taken before Judge James Foreman at the federal courthouse at Benton, Illinois for sentencing, Silverstein asked for permission to speak. He was handcuffed and shackled. "Are you scared of me?" he asked Judge Foreman, according to a court transcript. Silverstein had learned through his attorney that Baby Huey Cullum had sent a letter to the judge warning him that the Aryan Brotherhood was planning to attack the courthouse and take Judge Foreman hostage. Although in hiding, Cullum was continuing to work as a government informant. "I don't say I feel totally secure, but I don't feel unduly apprehensive," the judge replied. "Okie dokie," Silverstein sneered, shaking his head in contempt. "I just don't think you want out of prison," Judge Foreman said. "Hey, Judge, that's cool," Silverstein replied. "You were sitting up there and you are not scared of me. I'm hearing chains with U.S. Marshals all around. What would you do, Judge, if these marshals weren't here and I just walked up there and smacked you off that bench? What would you do? Cadillac tried once to kill me and missed, and I didn't. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish I wasn't in Marion. But we can't call the marshals or cops. We got to do what we got to do at the moment." "What I might or might not do is a hypothetical," the judge replied. "Let's remember, you got yourself in prison." The judge sentenced both Silverstein and Fontaine to an additional life term. When Silverstein returned to Marion, he began fretting. Everyone, especially the guards, heard Cadillac threatening me and did nothing to separate us, he recalled. Why? A Freedom of Information request seeking Bureau incident reports confirmed that officers had reported multiple threats being exchanged between the two prisoners. Cadillac Smith had been written up by officers for throwing objects at Fontaine and Silverstein, and for firing a zip gun at Silverstein. The reports showed Cadillac had been punished for attempting to stab Silverstein. In August, officers reported foiling a plot by Silverstein and Fontaine to firebomb Cadillac Smith in his cell. Despite these documented incidents, Cadillac Smith had continued to be housed on the same range as Silverstein and Fontaine, rather than moved to a different location. They knew what was happening and didn't care, Silverstein surmised. They saw us as pieces of shit and were hoping we'd kill each other. That's why they kept us together. Silverstein became convinced that officers working in the control unit wanted him dead, as he stewed alone in a cell. One officer's name kept popping up. Early on, Officer Merle Eugene Klutz had warned Cadillac Smith and Silverstein that one of them was going to get killed if they didn't stop harassing each other. Klutz's comment may have been a casual observation, but Silverstein kept replaying it over and over until it became much more sinister. He convinced himself that Officer Klutz was out to kill him. That's federal prison for you. a place that used to be dangerous, right? No, it's still dangerous. That's an excerpt from No Human Contact, chapter 13. It's a book wrote by Pete Early. I can tell you that Pete Early wrote the best federal prison book, probably the best prison book ever wrote. It was called The Hot House. And when I read The Hot House, that was kind of like the first step in me writing a book. When I read The Hot House, I said, man, I need to write a more modern book and tell people how it really is now. And I had read a bunch of bullcrap books that people wrote about prison that were in lows and camps, about federal prison. I was like, this ain't nothing. This ain't what's really going on. So I ended up writing Blood on the Razor Wire. I hate to say it, but Pete Early has the best book, The Hot House. I think I'm a close second with Blood on the Razor Wire, but that's up to you guys to decide. So go check out The Hot House. Check out No Human Contact. But I also want to talk a little bit about what happened with Cadillac. You know, it was just that day that Tommy and Fontaine had the ups. Cadillac was a dangerous dude. You heard that he fired a zip gun at him, right? A lot of this stuff is in the reports that, you know, came out after the murder or came out during, you know, the case. This stuff really happened. Was Cadillac trying to kill Tommy? Of course he was. Was Tommy plotting to kill him? Of course he was. And, you know, a lot of this was in his words, a lot of Tommy's words to his good friend Pete Early, who, you know, spent many months in USP Leavenworth with all of these guys. Barry Mills was there. Silverstein was there. Fontaine was there. I mean, these were the top guys, right? These were the guys. And sometimes as a society, we glamorize the villain. We glamorize, you know, the Tommy Silversteins, the Troy Kells. This case is pretty similar to what happened in Troy Kell, right? Beefing back and forth from the cell. Yo, I'm gonna get you when I get you. And someone gets the ups that day. And let me tell you something. It's not just what they used to do. This stuff's still going on. I mean, I got clients everywhere. I got friends in almost every prison as far as USPs go. And some of the homies that are watching from DC. This ain't a knock on Cadillac, not a knock on DC. It's just what really happened. I speak to people like Mika and, you know, still actually got a text from him just now. I deal with people like Goose connected to the BMF. People like the brother, you know, Rayshawn Long, the Crip dude that, you know, they alleged killed 20-something people. So I still have my ear to the place, and I'm not that far out. I've not even been out 3 years. But I want you to realize that this stuff happens. I want you to realize that people are plotting in prison. You know, when I was in a maximum security prison, when I was in Big Sandy, when I was in Pollock, when I was in USP Lee, dudes were always plotting. Whether they were plotting on getting money, plotting on doing something to you, plotting on robbing you, people were always plotting. And prisoners are innovative people. They use their minds and they sit back and they think and they watch and they figure it out. And that's what these cats did. They figured it out. They made wiring out of bread with black marker. Come on. I mean, they figure out things and they figure out ways to get you. You're not always safe. You've heard stories about Big Sandy. You've seen the video on Killer Chronicles. You know, you heard about how they put the dude in a cell and they massacred him. You hear about how, you know, the dudes got out at Big Sandy, got out of the cell and took the cop's knife and stabbed the cop, right? I mean, these things happen and they continuously happen. Prisons are locked down every day. Wardens are talking about, we're going to do this and we're going to teach them a lesson by not doing commissary. These people don't care about commissary. That doesn't stop them from doing something to you if they want to do something to you. This is what it is. This is what it is. I hope you guys enjoyed that one. You know, I like doing the readings. I think this is a phenomenal book. No Human Contact. Go get that book. Check them out. The links are in the description. And the book's pretty serious. I think you'll enjoy it if you enjoy prison content and you want to know what's real and you want to know what's raw. This is it. The Hot House is real and it's raw. Blood on the Razor Wire. Yeah, of course, it's my book. It's real and it's raw. No Human Contact. It's real and it's raw. Go get that book today. I promise you won't be disappointed. Blood on the Razor Wire TV. Until tomorrow, with respect, we're out.